following is an interview with James May, the creator of ToneDexter and now ToneDexter 2. I first met James at the NAMM show about 7 years ago and went on to interview him as well as review the unit for our channel. So even though, like all of our videos, products, and reviews, I wasn't paid, received sponsorship, or even a free unit, you'll notice during the interview it's really hard for me to hide my enthusiasm for all of the possibilities that it represents for players like us. The information in this video goes way beyond what you'll find on ToneDexter's website or in the marketing materials of any of the online stores like Sweetwater, etc. And I really push James on some specific aspects of how these new features could be utilized by us bowed string players. He even dropped a few chestnuts about surprise features that are coming for this unit through software updates in the very near future. To me, James is at the forefront of this band of heroes that are really helping us push creative string playing forward. And I'm so grateful he took the time to sit down for this interview. And with that, I give you James May. Well, welcome everybody. I am here with James May.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here.
Well, it's great to have you, James. And it's been a while since last we spoke. I believe it was at a previous NAMM show, and that was a really, really interesting conversation, and I'm looking forward to another one today.
Me too. And it's funny how time flies. Things happen. COVID, part shortages, not being able to build units when you were hoping to be able to build them. But then again, you persist, and then you come out the other side with something really nice to talk about.
Yeah, it's incredible. I can't imagine what small manufacturers like yourself went through during the pandemic, but I'm sure it was absolutely insane. Most of our viewers, James, are going to know about you via the interviews that we've done with you, which we'll link below. And I would say the vast majority of people watching this video are also going to know about and maybe even be users of the ToneDexter. But for those that are completely uninitiated, climbed out of a rock, or out from under a rock, I should say, and are just coming to this video cold, maybe YouTube recommended it. Can you give us a very brief overview before we dive into all the big news we have of what the ToneDexter is, and also after that, perhaps what wave maps are?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I don't presume that everyone knows about it yet. In fact, kind of think that most of our audience is actually not aware of it yet. I know you have a lot of hip people in your group. So, but for those who don't know exactly, I'll just kind of recap. Any acoustic instrument player, whether that be string player, cello, violin, whatever, or guitar player, mandolin, banjo, upright bass, any of those instruments that have a natural acoustic sound that we know and love. It's very difficult to get that to come across in an amplified situation. And as most of your audience, I'm sure, knows, there's more and more need to amplify these days, just the way things are going. So what are you going to do about that? Well, you can put up a mic and stand close to it. And, you know, if things are done right and you've got a decent sound engineer and you don't have a lot of feedback issues in the room you're in, then yeah, that can sound pretty good.
Yeah, and a very quiet band. Right? I guess that.
Well, okay, so there's that. I was coming to that. Yeah, yeah, and if you don't need to play too loud,
right.
As soon as you need to play a little louder, I know you do a lot of more progressive things that are not just classical. Yeah, the mic doesn't really work, and besides the fact that as a cellist, it probably doesn't matter that much. You have to stand still. Guitarists don't like to do that. Violinists don't like to do that. So that approach, let's call that the old school approach, has real limitations and doesn't work very well. So the next thing people do is they try to put a pickup in their instrument. And I know you've got the pickup stuff that you've been doing where you've been testing all these things out. And some are better than others, but I would venture to say, I'll go out on a limb and say, none of them can really get the sound that your instrument has when you listen to it acoustically in the room in front of you. The pickups just don't have the vantage point to do that, no matter how good they are.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. So, this was the original motivation for doing ToneDexter is, as a guitarist, I was always frustrated with that. And so what can you do about that? Well, so the pickup by itself really can't get the job done as well as we would like. In fact, especially on cello, violin, viola, whatever, it lacks dimension. It's very one-dimensional and doesn't do much for inspired playing, if you're listening to a crappy sound. Same is true for guitar, although I do say that the string players tend to be more picky about getting a good sound than some of the guitarists do. Not all, of course. There's still a lot of guitarists that want to sound like their instrument, but I'd say it's more prevalent in your world.
Sure. Yeah, I harken back to the days of those plastic Ovation guitars, that were just, sounded like just like quack, like a duck quacking. And
Yep,
there
yep.
are some players that I kind of like that.
Well, it will cut through a loud band.
Sure, it's useful.
That's the one thing you can say about it. And, sometimes it isn't that important to actually sound like a guitar sounds. It's more important to be, kind of strumming along with the chinky, chinky, chinky thing. But we're digressing a little bit. So the point being is that pickups on their own are really not going to get you where you want to be. So in comes what has become known as impulse response technology. And a lot of your people probably have heard of an impulse response. And to put it in the most layman's terms I can think of, an impulse response is really a complex filter. If you think about, you might have a preamp with EQ on it, and you've got a bass and a treble and a mid maybe. Well, you've got 3 bands to play with, and you can adjust, peaks and dips and, the widths of them. But
Sometimes.
an impulse response can be thought of as like a 200 or more band EQ that allows the sound to be tailored exactly as the mic heard it when you're training up a ToneDexter to make what we call a wave map. Underlying the wave map is an impulse response. It's actually more than one. So a wave map it's kind of a multi-dimensional impulse response. It allows you to adjust some parameters that you couldn't do with just a single impulse response.
Interesting.
And I'm talking about phase now. So not only does this impulse response allow you to equalize, let's say 200 bands, but it allows you to control the time and phase information in each of those bands separately. And why is that important? Well, because your instrument and my instrument and pretty much every acoustic bodied instrument is like a little mini echo chamber. So when you strike a note, if you were to just strike a note and then just kill it right away, that's going to persist a little bit inside the body of your instrument. And depending on whether you hit a resonance note, and it might ring out a long time, but no matter which, it's going to vibrate around inside that cavity. And what an impulse response, if created properly, allows you to do is recreate that sound of the whatever your strings are producing, and they're vibrating your body of your instrument. Those resonances and echoes, if you create the impulse response properly, it will capture that.
Yeah, exactly. And the air basically that we hear in the room, and no matter how good a piezo pickup is, or the preamp that's coming after that, because I think a lot of people tend to say, well, what about all those really expensive, super boutique, acoustic preamps on the market, which we've all tested at thepickuptest.com if you want to hear those.
Hmm.
If you're sending essentially the signal from kind of a piezo pickup into those, it's still kind of lipstick on a pig, isn't it? And
Yeah, that's one way to put it. I would put it as it's still pretty one-dimensional,
yeah.
and you can tweak that one-dimensional sound to get it kind of as good as you can get it,
Mhm.
but you're not going to get the fullness, the air that you spoke of, the rich vibrational quality that a proper impulse response will give you.
And James, we're going to have timestamps for the people watching this video, for those people that are, ToneDexter aficionados or IR wizards already and know all about this, to kind of
Right.
skip around a little bit. But
Sure.
again, for those people that kind of, I remember when we first did our review of the first ToneDexter, I think it has over 16,000 views on YouTube. Um, there was a lot of stuff going on in the comments section. And some of the
Hmm.
comments that people had were specifically about wave maps. Are they, and you kind of touched on this, and I wanted to dig a little deeper if we could. Are they
Hmm.
just another fancy word for IR? And obviously,
Um,
there are kind of
yeah, I
other.
can answer that.
Yeah, yeah. You kind of started to hint at it, but if you could dig a little bit deeper, I think that would be really
Yeah.
interesting for us to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great question because IRs are all over the place now. People who don't even know anything about technology have heard that term probably. And so a wave map, as we define it, is it's an impulse response, but it's more than that. It's two-dimensional. So there's another aspect to it that we can vary. So you can think of it as an impulse response with another dimension that we can vary the parameters of the timing or the phase information. So let's just call it a multidimensional impulse response. Plus, what we consider the wave map to be is all the stuff that goes with it now, with the new ToneDexter.
Mm,
The EQ, also the routing selections that you've chosen, which inputs and outputs you're using, and the adjustments that you make to that impulse response. Like, do you want to kill some of the feedback sensitive points, the resonances?
right.
Do you want to shrink the time or stretch out the time so you get more or less of that spaciousness quality? And this is, I'll talk more about this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're definitely going to get into that. All of that is piquing my interest, and I'm sure the listeners as well. So I think maybe now is as good a time as any to get down to why we're here today.
Mhm.
And that
Jacob, why are we here today?
well, it's all about this beautiful beast right here, and we're gonna have some even better pictures up when everyone's watching this video. But this is the ToneDexter 2,
Yes.
right? Yeah, this is a really big leap forward. I've had about a week or two to mess with this. We will be doing a full-fledged review coming later, but we had a talk a few weeks ago, James, on the phone about this, and I had so many questions. I started to see in Sweetwater and a lot of the online retailers, inklings that this was about to come out, and I got really excited. And we were talking, and there were just so many interesting points for me as a string player and a performer, and someone who uses the ToneDexter all the time. I consider myself a power user, actually.
So
Um,
would I.
so then I was like, James, we got to get on a video and just hash this out, because I know this is going to be really useful to people who are considering jumping into this world of IRs, all the way up to people who are ToneDexter users like myself, who are thinking like, what's up with this new thing? Should I upgrade? What are all the new features, and how can they benefit me? So
Right.
what I thought we would do today, James, is start with kind of taking a bird's eye view of the hardware,
Hmm.
what is still there, and what has been upgraded, changed, and uh, let's
Hmm.
call it improved for the better. And
Hmm.
then obviously I want to talk to you about what's changed underneath the hood.
Hmm.
And there's a lot there as well. And then uh, based on our phone conversation, you gave me a few chestnuts about some of the new features that are coming out. We're doing this interview on the 24th of January, right before NAMM. Uh, uh, but you
Fancy
were
that.
yeah, exactly. All everything that gets released is released before NAMM these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so true to form. But you were dropping a few really, really, really interesting features that are going to be coming in the next version of the software a few weeks from now. So probably a few weeks from when this video premieres. So
That's
wanted
likely.
to talk about that as well. Why don't we start though with the hardware? So
Hmm.
to me, just unboxing the unit and the basic value proposition to me of the ToneDexter that's always been so cool, and we've reviewed every other possible competitor on our website, is that like you start with um, a really really great acoustic preamp DI, something that's incredibly solid and well built, something that has all of the features that an acoustic player who just wants to bring one pedal to the gig with them and kind of have all the things they need has, a beautiful screen with a big tuner, now an even better screen, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then you add, I mean, if that alone wasn't, enough to kind of justify the price, then you add kind of the core functionality of what ToneDexter does and what would be impossible for any of these other units to do.
Hmm.
And even, some of the units that will do an IR thing now, which shall remain nameless, most of those don't have anywhere near the suite of features for, just this kind of one pedal does everything you can need in one shot. Um, I love still seeing that there's variability with the power supply from 9 to 15 volts. So if you do have a pedal board and this isn't your only pedal, fits everywhere, no weird wall warts. Um, Obviously, the boost, the tuner, the mute, all of the things that make this that complete pedal, those are all still there, right?
Yeah.
Nothing has changed as far as the basics.
Hmm.
But
Nope.
immediately upon looking at this, there are some very, very, very big, I would call them massive improvements. Um, why don't we start with the screen, just because it kind of jumps out at you? And
Can I just back up for 1 second,
sure, yeah,
if
please,
you don't
James.
mind? Yeah,
Yeah.
I just wanted to give because you had asked a second ago about sort of what's the same and what has changed.
Hmm.
So ToneDexter, the first gen, was it was a very pristine, high fidelity preamp to start with.
Hmm.
It used very excellent quality components. The analog sections were professional grade. There was no headroom issues. Very, very, very quiet. So, and then it did the IR processing, which we call a wave map, which has been expanded now. But so it was first of all a high quality preamp with really good IR processing. It was a mono unit, but it had two outputs,
Right.
a main out and a DI out, which could be controlled somewhat separately. Okay, so that's in a nutshell what a ToneDexter, the first gen, was. And it had a 3-band EQ, but actually a 2-band EQ.
Right.
And
Yeah. Two band
it was,
with the
the
knobs.
IO was a bit limited because we had a very primitive screen and we had basically analog pots that were controlling, some of them were controlling a digital processor, but the pots were not encoders that could spin around and around. So we couldn't just take up where we left off with settings with the
Right.
first generation unit. And so there were some real hardware limitations there that, in retrospect, you would have done differently, but you live and you learn. So we had what we had and
Hmm.
we made the best of it. And then we couldn't build them anymore because of the part shortage and around the time of COVID. So I decided to retire that model because I was basically forced to. But in a way, that was a good thing because I had a lot of visions for what I wanted the next generation product to be. So that was the perfect time to start working on it. And that was, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And so what the new product is, ToneDexter 2, is it's basically all of that, but there's an vastly improved screen, as you alluded to a second ago. All of the controls are digital encoders, which means, in the non-technical world, it means they control the computer and the computer controls the audio. So all of the things that you would want to do with your quote preset, the wave map, the EQ, which input you're using, which output you're using, the gains of the input, the gains of the output, all of that stuff now gets stored automatically with each wave map setting. We're not really using the term preset because that confuses some people. They think there's a pre-canned thing in there, which there's not.
Yeah.
So we're basically calling each setting that you can store a wave map, which includes all those things that I just mentioned.
Right, right. And that's an important point of where the hardware and the software kind of connect, right?
Yes.
Because one might say, okay, it's an encoder, that's kind of fancier, I guess, but it makes a huge difference in terms of the programmability and the ability to store wave maps now with all of the gain information, all of the EQ information, and you couldn't do that before on the previous ToneDexter.
That's
So
right.
that's a huge advance because, knobs move. Right, and then of course, for those of you who use multiple wave maps in a performance, say you have a mandolin and a violin, or you have two different cellos, or you have just different sounds that you want to use in different parts of your I've done that all the time. Or you have settings for a studio versus settings for a live performance. Now all of those can be stored and saved in one nice, convenient package. And the encoders in the new screen, you can see all the settings and where everything is, but that can all be saved together, which is really, really a big advancement.
It's a huge advancement, if I do say so myself.
Yeah.
It does everything that I wish the other one could have done.
Yeah, I'm sure you got a lot of requests about that. I also really appreciated, while we're talking about the screen, the fact that instead of just a little LED light flashing for gain, when there's peaking, that you actually have, real kind of feedback now, real meters. To me,
There's real meters, yeah.
yeah, that's a very important feature for me as well. And then of course it's a color screen now. It's brighter, and something that's incredibly important that I had always wished that the ToneDexter had was now, instead of just the wave map number that you stored it in, now you can actually see some notes about the map itself. Basic things like what mic it was recorded with, right?
Yes, you can name it.
You can really
name it. Make it something meaningful, like Stradivarius KM84.
Yes, KM84 being the famous Neumann small microphone. But that is hugely important because, once you start making a lot of these wave maps and experimenting and going back through things, all the time I would be like, wait a minute, was it slot 20 or 21 where I made the, having those notes, it's not a small thing. It's really handy. Right. And I assume that naming convention transfers to the files if you're moving it to your computer. So that's also really awesome to not be looking at a bunch of, WM9 or 11 or 12. You're seeing, Stradivarius, KM8, huge improvement. Speaking of file transfer, James, the next thing that jumped out at me that I absolutely love and was really happy to see is a USB-C port where the old camera card slot used to be. SD card slot.
Right.
That's so nice. I hated having to transfer
you and
files.
Else.
Me and everybody else, and I've got like a modern computer that I didn't have a camera card slot. I had to find my dongle and, this is so much better. It's a point about hardware, but I should ask, excuse me, I should ask, uh, is there, and I haven't messed with it yet, but is there an editor or is there editor software for this at
Right.
this point, or are we still
So,
moving files like
uh,
in a
so
file folder?
yeah. So the way this works is when you plug the USB cable into your computer, and just by the way, it isn't USB-C. It's USB. It's a micro USB 2.0. Even though if you had a C cable, you could actually use it on a C port if that's what you had on your
Yes.
computer.
Yeah.
So it's compatible. It's backwards compatible, but it isn't a C port on the device.
Okay.
Small detail. But once you plug it in, the way you access ToneDexter is you basically go to your browser of choice, whether it's Safari or Chrome or Firefox, and type in a URL number. Then it will, all of a sudden, ToneDexter will feed you a web page, and it's coming right from the box.
I see.
And that web page allows you to do all kinds of great stuff very easily. You can manage your wave maps. And by that I mean you could reorder them, rename them, back them up, delete them, move them. And as you do that, the changes take effect immediately on your ToneDexter. So if you
That's
just move number 2 to number 4, you'll see it show up immediately on your device.
Yeah, that is just so great to see. I think it really like moves ToneDexter, up into the echelon of, uh, fancy, guitar multi-processors and things where they're doing that. I really
Right.
feel like that's kind of the future. So yeah, really cool. And I assume software updates will also come through that same
Yes.
portal.
Yep. You just click and you just download it from our website. Click the software update button, point to what you downloaded, and it boom, it does it.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
The next thing I noticed are ins and outs.
Yeah.
So this is another kind of big deal, and I had some questions about it. Obviously, the original ToneDexter worked like, as you said earlier, your standard preamp DI pedal in terms of just the input and output functionality, right? You had an amp output, so you can control that separately. A DI to send to the front of house, and a mono input. But
Hmm.
now we've got a whole different thing going on here, right? We've got
Yes.
an input, but also a stereo aux input.
Hmm.
And then we have an output, but also a phone's aux output. Now, the old unit had a headphone output, but
Hmm.
it was only really functional while the unit was training, right?
Correct.
Yeah, which I was so upset about. uh,
Well, actually, you could use it to play through. You could play back through it, but it wasn't really set up to be to be a jack of all trades output. Whereas
yeah,
this new one, you can use it for phones. It'll drive phones quite loudly, so be careful.
okay.
Um, but then you could also use it as a line out or a stereo line out. Okay, so it gives there's more flexibility. I should just point out the first ToneDexter used a two-channel converter, 2 channels in, 2 channels out. Now you need two because we had the mic for training.
Sure.
Okay, this product uses a 4 channel converter, so I've got 4 ins and 4 outs,
Mm,
and I wanted to do something useful with those because the converter chip that I chose allowed it basically. So what I did was I provided, besides the mic input used for training, and there's actually more we can do with that. I'll talk about that later. But the normal mono input, and then there's the aux input, which can be a second mono input, or it can be a second stereo input. So if you have, this may not apply to most string situations, but some guitarists like to use 2 pickups in their guitar.
blending.
Guitars, yeah, it's a blended system. They call it a dual source system. They
Hmm.
have a pickup and then a mic, and the mic gives it some air. Now, I would venture to say that with a ToneDexter, you don't need that mic
Right.
because the impulse response in the wave map is going to give you all the air you're going to want. However, some people still might want to try to use that for whatever reason. So we will support, this product supports that situation. But more importantly for you, I think, and the string players of the world, is now you can have two inputs, two mono inputs. The stereo may not mean anything, but you can have two mono inputs, and each slot that you've stored preset information in, it can select either of those inputs. So you can have slot 1 be for cello number 1, slot 2 could be for cello number 2 with a completely different impulse response. So it's an instrument switcher if you want it to be.
I see. I see. So yeah, so just to make that completely concrete, if you have two cellos, as you said, or say you are a mandolin slash fiddle player,
Right.
you can have both of them plugged in the whole time. You don't need kind of an A/B switcher and then to change the, and
Exactly right. It's
that's a
built in.
very, very cool feature. That is
Yeah.
a very cool feature. Now, if you were a dual source guitar player and you had a mic and a, say you're blending a mic and a pickup,
Mhm.
which a lot of cellists do in particular because of just, that aren't using IRs because of just some
Right.
of the limitations of pickups
Hmm.
are even more severe with cellists than they are with violinists in a lot of cases.
Right.
Um, uh, would the idea be that in one of these slots, if say you had a microphone that could be plugged in 1/4 inch, or you had like a phantom converter or something, would that mean that you can run channel 2, which is the microphone, sort of dry,
Yes.
and blend it with channel 1, which might be the pickup with the IR on it
Yes.
together, and
Yes.
then I see. Yes,
Or
that is
you can do it that way, or you can actually, for any of the 32 slots, you can choose not to have an IR if you want. If you just want to go old school and have a dual source pickup with
this can be
EQ,
a blender.
it's a blender. It's a two-channel blender.
Ah!
And each channel has its own EQ.
Wow. And
Its
all of the
its own
information is
form.
stored
Yeah, it's
in
all,
each wave map.
yes.
Wow, that is cool.
And it's
That
stored automatically, by the way. I should point that out. You don't have to, like, if you tweak it, you don't have to say, okay, remember that. It automatically remembers.
okay. Yeah, so there's no like save set. We can talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that might even be better for our tabletop review, just so that everyone's kind of looking and following along. That I think that's a huge deal. Again, it just takes the value proposition of ToneDexter to another level. Like say you have different even setups that you use. How much would you pay for a really good stereo preamp blender that gives you all the features of this? Again, setting aside the IRs, which is the coolest, most amazing part. It's
Yeah.
like that's a really big deal. Now, what about the stereo output with some different applications for that? Now, the headphone thing that we mentioned, I can monitor myself with headphones
Yes.
as I play. Now that's a huge deal, especially for cello players. But I find whenever I'm using the ToneDexter, like in an arena setting or even like a super loud club, for me to be able to go up with this now and just have a little earpiece, one ear in, so that I don't have
Hmm.
to worry because the monitor guy's going to screw up. The guitars are going to be way louder. I'm not going to be
Right.
able to hear myself. But for me to just have this safety pin, this little independent headphone thing that I
Yep.
can control that'll work with kind of low and high impedance headphones, James,
Yes,
probably.
it will. It'll drive anything.
Okay.
Actually,
That's
I spent a lot of engineering hours making that circuit do what it was supposed to do for anywhere from consumer grade to professional grade phones.
Yeah, that's a huge deal, James, because I can tell you that, again, having tested at thepickuptest.com every single acoustic preamp DI on the market, there's only one that has a headphone output, and it costs $1,100, maybe like $1,250 with tax. So that
Hmm.
again, it's not a small thing because I would say maybe a third of the performances I do in those types of situations, I desperately need that feature. And having to
Yeah,
have a
good.
separate headphone amp next to it and stuff. Again, it's a big deal. Really cool. Or you can
And
use it at,
don't forget, so not only can you do that, but you've got two other outputs. You've got the main output
and the
and
DI.
you've got the DI output. And all three of those can have separate levels. You can send the DI to the front of house. You could send the main output to an onstage monitor for your other people in your band to hear you.
Yeah.
And then you can still use phones for yourself if you want to. And each can be tweaked.
Amazing. That's huge. I could send my pickup with the IR to an amp. I could send the mic to the house, and I could listen with headphones. I mean, that's crazy, and all the settings are saved.
Yeah.
Wow, so it's really kind of
Yes.
a mini mixer. I mean, it's more than a blender. It's almost like a digital mixer almost, right? In that it can save.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
It is, and that's a good segue to a feature that is not in there currently in version 1.1, but it will be in version 1.2. This is a spoiler alert.
Oh,
That you will be able to use the microphone input on the back in mixer mode. Like if you're a singer-songwriter and you want to plug in your guitar and plug your mic in and have them both go to the PA system, you have a
James,
little PA.
you are making me so happy right now. This was probably my top or maybe second top biggest request that I would have like asked for in a vacuum. That is so huge. Again, there's only two other units that we've reviewed, and we've reviewed everything on the pickup test that will allow you to do that, right? A really high quality mic preamp. Will this do Phantom, James?
Yes.
Yeah, of
And
course,
it's
because you can
switchable
plug
on
in
and off.
condensers.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, just again, the only other unit that even does that on the hardware side, and again, you don't get any of the IR, the really cool stuff that we're going to talk about in a minute. It costs about $1,300 again with tax. This is, I mean, this is like a completely different level of product for less than half the price. Smaller, all the things, really, really amazing. Like it's with this many features added, it's almost hard to think of anything on the market. If you were just offering this as a piece of hardware, again, because we're talking about hardware, I can't think of anything that can compete with this. That's even in this kind of ballpark. And there's
Yeah.
one
Let me
other.
just interject.
Yeah, please.
Go. I was just going to say, the reason that it has a bunch of cool features and that you're excited about it is because doing ToneDexter 1, I got a lot of user feedback about what they loved and what they wished it had. And I took all of those things basically to heart. And I said, well, if I'm going to do another one, I don't really want to make any excuses that it doesn't have something that it could potentially have, And because this has a 4-channel converter in it, that means 4 ins and 4 outs. I can get from analog to digital and back.
Yeah.
There's no reason I can't do these things.
Yeah, it's amazing, James. I'm trying to think of what I could possibly ask for. I've been touring. I made a video about touring with my acoustic quartet, and it's got a guitar and a sax player in it. And, I have to have a little mixer on the side, for my headphones and for some of my routing needs. And I have to, if I'm going to use the mic in some situations, sometimes I'll blend with that group. Again, there's a whole other mess of stuff that goes into doing like what I can just do with this box. It's really, really exciting. And of course, none of that stuff is digitally controlled where a preset can, change or correct or, or I have to deal with knobs moving, on tour. That's all analog gear outside of, my ToneDexter 1. So
Did I mention the fact that this has a stereo effects loop?
it's a stereo loop.
Yes.
Whoa.
So that means you can use it as a mono loop for just the normal things that you would do. You can use it as a mono send with a stereo return, like if you have a reverb unit that has a nice stereo return.
Yeah, stereo
Now, you won't be able to hear that unless you're using the aux out. Then you can get the stereo return.
Yeah.
The two other ones won't obviously carry stereo.
Sure.
But that is something you can do, which will be useful.
You can run
And the
stereo
other thing-
reverb now.
Well, you can. Yeah,
Wow.
a lot of reverb units that you buy, they'll have either a mono input and a stereo output, or sometimes a stereo input and a stereo output.
Many of our
So
favorites. Yeah.
this will be totally compatible with that. So
Wow.
you'll get the stereo effect if you want it.
Wow.
You know, I
Even
don't know
better,
whether
James.
in live situations whether that will be used that often, just because most rooms don't do stereo, you know, presentations just because of the problems with it. But nonetheless, ToneDexter will support it. And the other thing it'll support, which we touched on earlier, is that if you are using a dual source pickup, you can send each side of that through their own effect loop. In other words, you can use it as two independent effects loops.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, so even though you've got a lot of your EQ and things you want in here, say you have a compressor or something that you wanted to use on one and not on the other. Again, this is
Mhm.
really a full-fledged, it kind of takes me back to, it's not just a blender or whatever. This is a full-fledged digital mixer, isn't it? For
Yeah,
channel.
I guess that's fair. It's fair
Yeah.
to say.
Yeah, really exciting,
Yeah, I
James.
mean it's not set up like a typical mixer because
Sure.
it's centric. It's, you know, it's musician centric. It's instrument
Right.
centric.
Right.
However, in effect, it is that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, James, there's one more thing, and I'm sure I'm missing a few, but there's one more thing that I thought was really interesting on this new version that stood out to me, and that's the control in uh, uh, MIDI
Mhm.
section here. So we've got a spot for a quarter-inch controller that I take it can send MIDI signals, or can you use just a regular like Boss switcher as well? Is that kind of the idea, or is this?
Yes. Yeah, you've basically got it. So that jack is multi-purpose. So if you have the switch set over to the MIDI setting,
Mhm.
that's the only hardware switch on the box, by the way.
Yep, two
Yeah.
position switch right up here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Everything else is done in software. So there you go. Yeah, you got
Ah.
it in focus. So if you set that to MIDI, then you can plug in a TRS jack that's wired to the MIDI standard. There is a standard for
Yes.
converting a MIDI plug to a TRS.
Yeah.
If you do that, you can send program changes to the box to change presets. So you can go
Yes.
from slot 1 to slot 2. And there's a setup in the system config page where you can map channel numbers to slots. So it's totally set, you can set it up any way you want. But basically what it does is it allows you to do program changes to control your slot selection.
Yeah.
That's what it does right now.
And I think that's such a big deal, James, because some of you may have seen my one of my cello pedal board rig building videos. But whether you have a giant spaceship or you're just type pedal board with all kinds of crazy guitar pedals,
Yeah.
or you're using something like this, like I do most of the time with, say, a Line 6 Helix and maybe a freeze or a looper, but like a very small kind of pedal board. What happens is if this is in the loop, you lose a lot of, like now with all of these different routing capabilities and all of the different things you can do with this, it would be hard to really take advantage of that unless this was kind of the brains of your rig, which is of course it can be and definitely can
Hmm.
be at this point. But now with the MIDI capability, and as I said, you know, the fact that it still has the variable power things, you don't need any wall warts or any crazy. This really makes this incredibly useful for the most adventurous kind of, you know, sound explorers that have all kinds of stuff going on. Because again, you can this will with any of your MIDI controllers, you can access all of not only you know your wave maps, but all of the different routing possibilities and changing things on the
That's
fly
right.
from
Right.
whatever.
You could set up slot wave map slot presets that don't do anything except change routing if that's what you want to do.
Yeah,
You wouldn't
exactly.
have to use the audio processing if you were just trying to do a routing thing. To some degree, you could do that, but of course, you may as well use the EQ in the wave map
A
in the
hundred
IR
percent.
part of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But you may have you know, like when I even am playing acoustic, you know, you might have a pits section where all of a sudden you want to get rid of maybe something you're blending with, or you might want a drier sound, maybe less IR or a different IR, and maybe you want some compression, which is in an effects loop, and you have a compressor just for your pit sound. Bam, one stomp of that MIDI pedal, everything changes. And you could do that from the ToneDexter too, but to have it just like that is part of a bigger rig. That's amazing. Or what about a bowed sound where maybe you're insisting on blending in your microphone, and all of a sudden when you have a really boosted sound, when the band gets really loud, that mic's just going to feed back. You want to get rid of the mic and boost the your wave map, your impulse response that you have with the direct, all possible, all right in there. I mean, this is pretty big stuff. Just to give you some use cases for my fellow string brethren.
Yes. And before we get off that jack,
sure.
It also will function, if it's not functioning as a MIDI in, it's an external pedal. So you could plug in a stereo, just basically a momentary foot switch, 2 foot switches wired to a TRS jack.
Right, like the Boss FS1 or FS3 or FS.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them out there.
Yeah.
And you can use that to do one of two things. You can duplicate the 2 pedals that are on ToneDexter, the 2 switches. So supposing you wanted to have it up so you could adjust it easily, and then you wanted the foot switches down on the floor, you could do that.
So that would be your tuner pedal, or that would be your mute/tune, or your boost.
Yeah. So you can duplicate those, or you can just set it up as a dedicated up-down scroll. So you could change from one slot to the other just with those, and use the mute and the boost just like they normally would be used.
Very cool.
It gives you a little flexibility.
Amazing. Okay, well, James, I'm already super excited. We could stop right now, but there's a lot of other stuff to talk about here in terms of software, and just kind of what's going on underneath the hood. We spoke quite a bit about this on the phone, but I was wondering if you could sort of give us a bird's eye view of, we talked about the software editor and the computer, and now we have naming conventions and all of that. But maybe we could dig in a little bit deeper about how wave maps are different in the new ToneDexter. I should also say right here, before we even get started, just a public service announcement. It is on our website, but the wave maps that we created together for Yamaha, and really any an NS instruments, solid body instruments, but anyone who has a ToneDexter 1 and you have some wave maps that you like, or if you're wondering if they transfer over, they do not, right? A lot of things have changed to make them incompatible, but changed for the better. And maybe you could kind of pick up from there, Jason.
Yeah. So there was, there were limitations on what the old ones could do. And if we had to carry those forward to the new product, it would be crippled a little bit. So we decided, okay, sadly, we're gonna have to cut off the old ones and start again. However, it's really not a loss if you think about, it's so easy to create them now. And I wanted to talk a little bit about it. It's even easier than before. So before, you plugged in, and then you had to set the input gain appropriately for your
plugged in your microphone, just so
plug in your mic, you plug in your pickup.
Right.
You have to do both.
Sure.
And on the old unit, you had to set the pickup gain so that you weren't clipping, etc. The mic gain was adjusted for you automatically. On the new unit, you don't even have to set the pickup gain. It will do that for you. So you just plug in, tap, you're in training mode. You play for a couple 10 seconds or something, it will automatically gain those things appropriately and then automatically take you into training mode. Now that's similar to what happened before, but it works a lot better now. Before there were some misses where sometimes it was a little finicky.
Right. Not
anymore. So you do the automatic gain thing, then it starts training. It's a little faster than it was before, and good news, it creates a little bit better of a wave map. The impulse response is better.
Interesting.
Yeah. Not that it was bad before, but it's just, I found some ways to even do it better.
Okay.
In the preceding 2 years.
Are we talking about more bands, higher resolution, different sampling rate? Like what do or
Um,
maybe it's just some proprietary magic that you don't
well,
want.
it's a little bit of all of that, but I think you can distill it down to the algorithm just has gotten a little bit smarter.
Mm,
So, before, in some cases, you could hear some artifacts, usually not, but sometimes.
mhm.
Now, you probably won't. I've gotten rid of some of the residual things that, you learn over time.
Yeah, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
And the new wave maps also, uh, because they're stored, as you said, with all the gain information and the EQ information and all of that, that also makes it them incompatible with the.
That's right. Yeah, all of the things all the parameters are stored. The old one didn't have that capability.
Sure.
The other thing I wanted to say, I don't know how we're doing on time. If I'm talking too much, just let me know.
Oh, it's fine, James. No, no, no.
Okay.
I think everybody. I mean, if everyone is half as excited as I am, we could definitely keep going.
Yeah, well, I'm still excited about it. I worked my tushy off last year trying to get this thing ready, but now I'm sort of having fun talking about it. Let's just put it that way. While I'm still working on it, obviously, but and it's not just me. I have a development partner in Australia by the name of Josh Bennett, who's just a brilliant musician and a brilliant software engineer.
Mm.
So it's a great combination for ToneDexter. So just wanted to put that out there. And what I wanted to say is there's another, maybe a little more subtle thing about the settings always being saved. Okay, that's true. You make a change, it's there. You come back to that same slot, those changes just show up again automatically. But there's an option. There's actually two levels of memory. There's the working memory, and then there's a base level memory. And you can decide whether you want to commit those changes to the base level memory or just keep them there in the working level memory.
I think you're talking about global settings.
Well,
Is
no,
that
it's
kind of?
actually not. These are not
Okay.
global. I'm talking
Okay.
about per slot, per wave map.
Okay.
There's a bunch of memory that just follows it along that has all your settings there.
Okay.
And they'll always be there. But if you want to commit those to a base level, then you could go to a new venue, tweak the EQ differently, and that'll still be there the next time you go. But if that's not appropriate on the next venue, you can say, okay, give me back my base level settings, and boom, there they will be.
Interesting.
So it's like you have two levels of memory that will serve you because there will be stuff that you always want, and there will be stuff that will be venue dependent.
Of course, yeah. As with EQ, that always happens, right? You're
And you
always
don't
gonna
have to waste time redoing things this way.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a really interesting thing, James. Yeah,
And it happens just kind of
incredibly
automatically.
helpful.
There's
Yeah.
a knob to say store it in the baseline or revert or store, and it's just one button push, and it gets you everything back if you want it.
It's almost like a snapshot in a way.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very, very interesting. Very interesting. Super helpful. Of course, like any of us who play live,
Right.
going from, venue to venue, yeah,
Yeah.
changes have to be made. Sometimes it's on the sound guy, but if you're making it, it's just ginormous to be able to, to make those changes and know that you're not every night changing your presets in a way where you're gonna have to change them again,
Yeah, you'll have to undo that and redo what you had before.
Yeah.
Now you don't have to make that
You're
choice.
starting from a baseline.
You get
That's
both.
that's huge, James. So
Yeah.
what about we had a really interesting talk about another feature um, uh, that I'd love for you to kind of expand upon where so on the old ToneDexter we had on ToneDexter 1 we had essentially kind of a blend control, right, that allowed us to blend in the raw signal with
Right.
the wave map.
Right.
But you've added a really, really interesting feature on this new version on ToneDexter 2 where you were explaining it to me in terms of compression of time versus
Hmm.
expansion of time. Can you kind of speak more to that? I
Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit hard to describe in words, but one good thing is with version 1.1, there's a graphic display of this. So you'll actually be able to see the impulse response and see how it changes when you alter what we call it used to be called the character control.
character.
We only had two settings. Now we call it spaciousness, and we have anywhere from 0 to 200% in 5% increments. So it's very adjustable at a very fine level. And what it does is, if you think about, if you go back to our earlier talk, earlier part of this talk where I talked about your instrument is this little echo chamber where things resonate around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the spaciousness control allows you to decide how long you want those things to last. So when you train it up and you create the standard wave map, it is what it is. It's what the mic heard. Okay? And sometimes that's perfect, and sometimes it's a bit too much if you're playing in a venue that's got a big PA and it's a big room. It's got its own echo chamber. And, room acoustics I'm talking about. It's not intended to be an echo chamber, but it's room acoustics that can be, it can mask a lot of stuff. So if you have a bit too much of that time thing already happening with your impulse response, it can get a little mushy or lost when it's going through a PA system. So what the spaciousness control does is it allows you to dial it back and shrink the time, okay? And it just makes it sound more and more direct. It's like it's more and more in your face.
Interesting.
And if you're listening to it through phones or trying to record, it's probably not what you want. But if you're playing live, it often is what you want. And you get to control how far back you dial it. So if 100% is the norm, it's what the mic heard. If you go back, towards 0, you can see the impulse response compressing towards the left.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see it on the screen. And when you get all the way to 0, it's kind of all bunched up on the left-hand side. And that's what people tend to think an impulse response is what they see when it's all bunched up on the left.
Mm.
And what you'll hear is you're going to hear it's going to be less space. It's going to be, well, obviously less spacious because that's what you're doing. You're taking all the extra time out of it, and you're just making it like you had a 200 band EQ where you could set each one of the things, but there's no extra time in any of that stuff. So it's like a flat. It just sounds. It sounds like it's more direct. It's less interesting. So the more you go towards 0, the less interesting it is to hear it in a full fidelity, recording or headphones. But some of that is really necessary when you're playing live because the room will take care of the rest of it for you.
Yes. Yeah. So you get more nuance over time, right? Obviously, you don't want it to be too long because then you get,
Well, it gets all smeary and it gets lost on a PA system. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And you get a little bit buried you're not as distinct. So even though this sounds a little weird to talk about it this way, I can tell you from firsthand experience and from a lot of customer feedback that this really helps.
Was that the inspiration for it? You were when you came up with this idea, to implement this, because I haven't really heard of anything like this being done. Maybe there's like a precedent, but where did the inspiration for this come? Did it just come from players saying, I like having my impulse response, with it. I generally set the blend control to taste so that, I have a little bit of that sort of, cut because sometimes if you're full IR, anybody who's used IR
Yeah, exactly that.
knows. But so what was the inspiration to transition from just a simple blend control to something like this? And like, where did that come from?
That's a great question. And it's basically what you said. A lot of people, a lot of people feel like they have to blend some direct in with their IR. Now, there's two reasons for that. One, and I'll just say this out front, it's because a lot of IRs are really crappy and they don't hold up on their own. So you have to do something to get it to sound usable. Okay, so
Completely
that is
true.
not ToneDexter. Okay, we can throw that one out the window. That was not the motivation. However, the second reason is valid, is that you want to cut through the PA a little bit better. Okay, and that was the only tool that everybody else offers, is blend in some of the dry pickup, the raw pickup, blend it in. Well, I reject that approach because your raw pickup sounds like crap.
No,
You know?
exactly, exactly.
Okay, so you're taking something that sounds good and you're putting some crap in it. Well, no,
But
I don't
you know,
want to go there.
high pitched nasally crap that probably cuts through the
Yeah.
PA.
Now,
Yeah.
in all fairness, on ToneDexter, you can EQ that dry path separately. So you can kind of get it tolerable, let's just say.
So you
However,
could still blend if you wanted to.
you can blend and you can EQ the blend separately, the IR part and the dry part blend separately. But that will not sound as good as using the spaciousness control and not blending in any of the raw pickup. I guarantee it. I mean, I can't, of course, 100% guarantee it, but for the most part, I would say, it's very likely that this is going to sound way better. So that was the motivation. Now, I had to figure out how to do it mathematically. That was a bit of a tricky bit, and cracked that nut some time ago, because we have character on ToneDexter 1, and it was very similar, but we just didn't offer as much control. And that's because there wasn't enough processing power to allow that, but now
Yeah.
there is.
Yeah. That's so interesting, James. That's so
Yeah.
interesting.
So
Okay.
even though it seems a little foreign, once you try it out in real life, you will appreciate it. I'm telling you.
And of course, for anybody who would like to hear and see a demo of this, we'll be releasing our review of ToneDexter 2, where you can hear all the sounds, Megan and me playing our instruments, and of course, we'll be demoing that feature in quite a bit of depth
Right.
in a couple of weeks.
Right.
That should be coming out. So unbelievably exciting, James. So cool. I thought before I let you go, if you could give us, because again, in our phone conversation, there were a couple of really, really exciting chestnuts that are
Yeah.
coming out in the latest software update, which is coming really soon after this video is released. So
Yeah, that's right.
whichever ones you're comfortable sharing,
Okay.
I was wondering if you'd be comfortable.
I will do that, but if you could bear with me, I wanted to touch on one other topic that we
Sure.
didn't get to yet. Because, basically the overall scope of this is what's new and exciting in ToneDexter 2 that really wasn't there in ToneDexter 1. So I just touched on spaciousness. It's a big one. After all this other stuff we talked about, which is automatic, saving all the routing, all the EQ, all that stuff, that's sort of now, spaciousness is a big deal. The other big deal is feedback control.
Okay.
So we have a smart feedback control. We had it on ToneDexter 1 in a more primitive form. On ToneDexter 2, it's been advanced like everything else. So it allows you to, as you turn the knob up, it starts to cut back the main resonance that's peaking up above everything else, because the mic can hear it, right? You have an instrument, a pickup, a mic, it knows where the resonances are, because that's what an instrument does, and that's what a mic can hear. It's part of what our ears like, but if there's too much of it, it will be a feedback problem. So when you turn up the anti-feedback control, I think we abbreviated FB for short, because there's not a lot of room on the screen. It finds the highest peak within this range, and the range goes from about 50 hertz all the way up to about 500 hertz, actually. It covers pretty much the whole first, on a cello for sure, and a guitar, the whole first position of all the notes, basically.
Right.
And these are where the resonances are going to be because of the size of the instruments.
Yes.
Even an upright bass will be in that range. So what it does is it knows where the peaks are within that range. It goes to the highest one and starts attenuating it from the top down. And then when that comes to the level of the next highest peak, then it brings both of them down together as you continue to turn the knob. And then the third highest peak, as soon as it gets to that level, it's bringing all three of those down together. So it's basically hitting the worst offender, and then when it gets down to the worst offender being as loud as the second worst offender, it starts bringing both of those down together. And it all happens before your eyes. When you use the feedback control, you get to see the impulse response not in the time domain, but in the frequency domain. You get to see what the frequency response of it looks like, and you can see this action happening.
Yes.
And it's cool to look at.
It is. It actually is very cool to see. Yeah.
And those that are technically minded will, sort of, it'll be eye candy. But for the standard musician who doesn't really care about the technology, they just want it to work, it just works. So if you're having feedback problems, you just dial this up until they go away.
Yeah.
And it will have a minimal effect on the sound of your instrument.
Yeah, that's awesome,
the point.
James. Yeah,
Yeah.
just awesome.
So that's the other big deal, really, with ToneDexter.
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, very exciting, James. Yeah, thanks for adding that. Obviously, the first one had a notch, but this is much more
Yeah,
sophisticated.
and we also have a notch. We have a programmable notch you can use.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
addition
There's
to this.
EQs too.
So the EQ has a notch. It's a high pass, low, mid, and high, plus a notch on the final output. So you won't be wanting for EQ flexibility. I'm sure of that. Now, chestnuts. Okay, what's coming? That's a good question, and I can share a little bit. I have, well, you can't see it. There's a whiteboard over there with a whole bunch of features that are going to be popping out in the future some point, who knows when. But the two most eminent ones are actually one we talked about a second ago, which was the mixing in the mic live to use it as a mixer for singer-songwriters, or if you want to augment your instrument with a microphone. That's going to be in the next release. There's one other feature which we call baked EQ. Okay, not to be confused with baking a pie or baked Alaska or any other baked thing, but baked EQ. Okay, so what this will allow you to do, you meaning anyone who wants to tailor a wave map that they've created on their full-bodied acoustic instrument to make it usable for a solid body instrument. This is the tool that's going to make that easy. Okay, now you and I both know when we did this before, you offered stuff for the cello and the violin. I offered stuff for the guitar.
Yeah.
These were wave maps that were created on nice sounding instruments, and then they were adjusted so that they would perform well with the pickups that you would find on a solid body instrument.
Yamaha, NS Design, these are the libraries that we've had on the site and which many of you guys have used over the last couple of years. Yeah.
Right, and there's I don't know if you can see it here, there's a Yamaha silent guitar sitting right there. Hanging over there.
Dig that.
Yeah. And so we have the same thing in the guitar world. We also have people who put piezo pickups on their actual electric guitars.
Right.
And want those to sound acoustic for some of the time during their set,
Yeah, the kind of under saddle, under the bridge. Yeah.
Right. They sound horrible by themselves, but with the right combination of stuff, they can be made to sound good. So the baked EQ will allow you to take any wave map that you've created and adjust the EQ. So here's the process. You, Jacob, plug in your nice sounding cello, put a mic of your choice in the position of your choice, you create a nice sounding wave map, or 2 or 10, whatever. Now you want to plug in your solid body cello and make those sound good. Well, how do you do it? The only thing you have to do is adjust the EQ, okay? Now, that's totally possible because we've got nice EQ adjustment possibilities, but how do you translate that to someone else you want to give or sell this wave map to for their solid body instrument.
Mhm.
Well, the process that we've come up with is we're calling it baking the EQ into the wave map. So
Okay.
once you decide what EQ adjustments are required to make your solid body sound good through that wave map, you can hit a couple of buttons. It will make a copy of the original one. It won't destroy the original one. It'll make a copy, and it will take any of those EQ adjustments and actually apply them to the impulse response permanently.
Mm. Yeah, it'll make a
Okay,
new
and
impulse.
call it a new something. You can
Yeah.
rename it as my cello for this NS instrument or whatever.
Yeah.
And you can do that as many times as you want. You can experiment, etc. But then those things can be used by any other ToneDexter user. They won't have to use their EQs and set them like you had to set them. They will automatically be there in the impulse response. So they're starting from a good place. And then, of course, they can adjust EQ on top of that, like
Right.
you always can.
And bake that if they want to.
And bake that if they want to. Yeah. But the point is, they probably won't have to because you or I will have done that for them
Right.
with, we know, the more sophisticated users kind of know how to do that.
Right.
But anyone can do it. So it allows anyone with a ToneDexter and access to a good sounding acoustic instrument to make some wave maps and then plug in their solid bodies, tweak them up, bake the EQ in, and then they're off to the races.
Very exciting, James. That's so awesome. Yeah, that's a huge deal. Really, really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, it's not the main user that's going to, not the most of the users probably won't do it, but there will be enough of them that are going to appreciate this.
There's a lot of violinists and cellists out there, James, that have solid-bodied instruments that they need, for really loud feedback situations, or maybe they
Hmm.
use high gain effects or whatever it is. I mean, I've got obviously,
Right.
I'm insane, but I've got my NS here and my Yamaha here and my uh,
Right.
and many other instruments. But yeah, that's a pretty big deal, I think. Yeah, this ability to, instead of just creating a preset with a wave map and which includes the EQ, to be able to plug in your other instrument and to basically be able to build and tweak the IR that's there and the wave map that's there and turn it into a new wave map, basically,
Hmm.
using that foundation. Really, really great. I think
Yeah.
that's extremely useful,
Yeah. I
certainly
knew you
for us
would.
mode string players. Yeah,
Yes, I knew you would.
yeah,
That's why I called you and told you about it.
we
And
like.
you know, I'm getting requests now say, hey, we need some wave maps for solid body guitars and so forth. And I said, yep.
Yeah, yeah. Time to fire up.
And I'm basically lazy. I don't like to have to go to do more work than I really should need to do a certain thing.
Yeah,
So I'd rather spend my time engineering a good way to do it. So then it's just easy after
yeah.
that.
I hear you. I
Yeah.
hear you. Yeah. Well, James, I am so grateful for your time, for giving us just this huge amount of really, really great information about the new ToneDexters. I was mentioning to you, just combing through the initial press releases about it and, looking at Sweetwater. They always do such a great job photographing and everything. But there were just so many questions I had that
Yeah.
couldn't be answered in that format, and that I feel like we've really gotten to dive into. And I know this is going to be really valuable for the members of our pickup test and electric string player community. I also want to say, James, that even though we are as independent and objective as possible when we do all of our reviews. I really feel that you and other small entrepreneurs in this space of pickups
Hmm.
and mini mics and stuff uh, that have persevered and that continue to innovate and to listen to what other players are doing. You guys are really pushing this art form forward. And
Yeah.
I really, really feel like you guys are heroes. And I just want to send all of the love and respect for just putting this thing into the world. I know I'm gonna get a lot of use out of it, but I really feel like this is a it's a sea change. It's a huge leap forward, uh, and I can't wait for the review to come out in a couple
Well,
of
I
weeks.
appreciate the kind words, Jacob. And I just remember when we first met, I think it was at a NAM,
Hmm.
and I said, you know, you might want to check out our ToneDexter. And then uh, I think I sent you an eval copy to play with. And then you called me a little while later and you said, This is really something different, isn't it?"
Hmm.
I think those were your exact words.
Yep.
And I said, "Yep, I think you get it."
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. Well,
but I'm glad you did. It's,
Me too. Me too.
yeah.
And I'm excited, so excited to dive into this more. I've done a little bit of prepping it, but yeah, the review is going to be really exciting. And yeah, just amazing work, James. Thanks for
Yeah.
all that you do, and we'll talk soon.
Very good. Thanks, Jacob. Nice talking to you.